Hello class, welcome to January 9th. All right, so today what we're going to be doing is we're going to take a look at the pretest that you took yesterday, and we're also going to talk about the synthesis essay exam, and we're going to talk about writing introductions for a synthesis essay. We're going to look at some of the national responses for that college essay, hopefully if there's time at the end of class, and then seeing you all write an introduction for something might be interesting. So I'm going to get started by giving you some background, more background on the synthesis essay. All right, so first of all, reminder to you that a synthesis essay is in itself, you can think of it as being like a mini research paper. So you get a topic, you have to choose a side, but then you also get evidence that supports your side. The reason that this is one of the easier ones for students to complete is because you guys have been writing research papers since, I don't know, 4th grade, 5th grade. So this is just trying to show how well you know how to deal with inserting sources into papers. So you want to do it just like you did the SLO. Get the prompt, figure out what your thesis is going to be, figuring out what reasons you have for supporting the side that you do, and then bring in the evidence to support your reasoning. So the sources only come in the third step. These two you should be doing on your own before looking at the sources. This point is really important. You have to use at least 3 sources. If you don't use 3 sources, no matter how well written your essay is, you will not pass the essay. So you want to make sure 3 sources, absolutely, you have those. Now, one of the things I mentioned yesterday on the screencast was that you want to make sure that the sources aren't the only thing that you're using to write your paper. You also want to include anything you know on the subject, your observations, or whatever experience you have that adds to your point of view. So if you learn something in history class or environmental studies or something like that, bringing in your own information can also be important. Of course, you want to make sure that you're using at least 3 sources and that you're using them well, but the readers don't want to feel like the sources are leading your paper. All right. So we will come back and take a look at the answers for the National College Cost Essay, the one that you did yesterday, and so you can kind of see how someone did on that. We'll come back and look at that when we're done with this portion of the slideshow. All right, so when you're writing an introduction, you want to make sure that you have a very clear thesis statement with precise language that nobody questions which side that you're on. So let's give an example of how we write that thesis statement. This is very similar to your argumentative thesis statement. So let's get a sample idea on what the effects of gambling are. So the issue is whether you believe there are positive aspects of gambling that outweigh its harmful effects, or whether the reverse is true, that gambling causes more harm than good. So decide which side you're on, and then determine what your thesis is going to be. Let's take a look at 3 different theses. Here's our first one. Gambling is an activity that affects the lives of millions of Americans. Okay. That's not a thesis, because that thesis does not take a position on gambling. It just is stating a fact. Gambling is an activity that affects the lives of millions of Americans. If someone had added to that, gambling is an activity that negatively affects the lives of millions of Americans, now we're getting closer to a thesis, but it's still not really good. Let's look at this one. The economic effects of gambling are generally positive. Okay. Now we're getting more specific. We're talking about the economic effects, and we've chosen a side, positive. But the thing that it's missing is that it's not a split thesis. Let's look at the third one. Although some forms of gambling have positive results, in general, the losses that come from the act of gambling are more negative. Okay, so now we have a split thesis. We begin with a acknowledgement that there is another side to our position, and then we end up with our own side. All right, so let's talk about qualifying words. In the last slide, the words generally or in general, generally, are considered qualifying words. That means it takes a position and it softens it just a little bit. So without that word, that means that it's an absolute truth. So if you said the economic results of gambling are positive, there's no exception to that rule that you're leaving in. So using terms like generally or in general, or qualifying terms like that, help you to support your position more than if you go all out black and white. So consider putting in qualifying terms like almost, frequently, generally, in most cases, likely, often, customarily, traditionally, where you take that side that you have and you say like most of the time or something along those lines, in most cases. And that way you can't shoot down your entire position by just one example in the negative. Plus, you're going to be wanting to present the counter argument to that anyway, because synthesis essays, like the argumentative essay, look for you including a refutation and a rebuttal. So where should you put your position statement, aka your thesis statement? You can put it in the first sentence, especially in timed writes, because you're really focused on getting the information in. You can have it to be part of the first sentence, or you can create an introduction, like a funnel introduction, or contextualize the introduction the way that you do in a formal piece of writing. Now, timed writes, remember, you are limited for time. So what I usually suggest for people is to leave a few lines blank at the beginning of the packet and then write the thesis statement. Then you can go back and you can add more like attention getters or things like that to kind of grab the audience's attention once you're done with your thesis statement. So one way that you can do that if you want to create some sort of funnel introduction is go through the sources for some sort of interesting quote or fact or idea that you can use for an opening that might draw the readers in. That is a use of one of the sources. So you add at the first paragraph of your synthesis essay, if you use that, you would have already used one source. It's a one way to make sure that you check off some information. All right, so let's talk about different types of funnel introductions and ways that you can grab attention. So one way is an incident or anecdote or news story related to the point that you try to make in your essay. So here's an example of that, an anecdote, a story, or an incident. This happens to be like information about a specific town. Until Harrah's introduced casino gambling, Joliet, an Illinois steel town 40 miles from Chicago, was a depressed place with high unemployment, low wages, and slum conditions. With the coming of the casino, the city enjoyed a remarkable economic rebirth. Jobs were created, opportunities for businesses multiplied, and the place became a magnet for investment in new housing, businesses, restaurants, and motels. While gambling is known to harm millions of Americans, the revitalization of Joliet demonstrates that its overall effect on a community can nevertheless be positive. All right, so you see here we have this example or anecdote of what happened in a town called Joliet. And then here you have your position statement or thesis statement. That is a split thesis statement at the end. Okay. Types of introduction: an incident or anecdote or news story related to the point that you want to make in your essay. Another type is to state a really provocative idea in an ordinary way or an ordinary idea in a provocative way. So here's the idea. Gambling casinos pay higher wages to their employees than almost any other business except salmon fisheries in Alaska. In spite of its potential for positive economic effects, however, the gambling industry harms American society more than it helps. So here we have a little fact, provocative fact, that gambling casinos are very high paid. People who work in gambling casinos actually get higher pay of anybody except salmon fisheries in one state. But we're actually going against that idea of its positive effects in our thesis statement, which makes it kind of interesting because when you start reading that, you think that the author is going to go on the positive side, but then they flip to the negative side. Okay, another type, a quotation from the prompt or from one of the sources or something from your reading or your experience. So we're going to go with a very well-known aphorism, which is a quote that a lot of people know. All you know is a dollar and a dream. Okay, so we're starting with that one. We don't include who it's by because it's an aphorism, which means that a lot of people have said it and it's not actually attributed to anyone. So we say, All you need is a dollar and a dream. These catchy words have enticed millions of gullible New Yorkers into throwing their money away with the hope that they'll win the state lottery. Because low-income people play the lottery more than well-off people, the lure of gambling harms them more than it does others. So this thesis statement is extremely specific. We're going to be talking about low-income people, but it is kind of missing a split thesis. It doesn't acknowledge the benefits of it. That's kind of understood, but I'd like to see you be a little bit more specific in your thesis statements. Okay, commonly held assumptions. You take these commonly held assumptions that we all have and use them in a different way. So here's a commonly held assumption, and we're going to twist it around. It's kind of an anecdote as well. Last February, when Sophie Whitaker, a waitress in St. Louis, Missouri, eagerly boarded a Mississippi riverboat for an evening of playing slot machines, she had no idea that winning really meant losing. Okay, so we think you're going to win the lottery, everything's going to be great. This knocks down that assumption. She won $500 that night and came back the next weekend to win some more. But the gambling gods had other ideas. Sophie lost, and lost big. To make up for losing nearly $1,000, she returned a few nights later. 2 days later, she went back once more, and then again and again, sometimes calling in sick to her boss in order to spend the evening hoping for a jackpot. She won a few dollars now and then, but slid ever deeper into debt, pulled down by her newfound addiction. Sophie's experience is not unique. Hers is but one of the countless similar stories about Americans who have surrendered to the gambling habit, an unquestionable plague on American society. And then here at the end of that, you would have to put in your split thesis statement. Although some people believe that gambling has positive benefits for the nation and for gamblers, it is true that, on the other hand, generally people experience more harm than good when it comes to gambling. Something along those lines. Okay, one more. A question that you'll answer in the essay. This is a rhetorical question where we'll find the answer within the essay. It is not a question that uses the word you in it, like, have you ever been gambling? Ugh, those are the worst. So do not use one of those questions. Instead, you can go with something like this. Why have Native Americans fought so hard in Washington for the right to run casinos on their tribal lands? The answer is simple. Casinos make their owners rich. In addition, gambling profits can pay the bills for schools, hospitals, roads, and other needs. In effect, in the right circumstances, gambling does more good than harm. All right, so now this introduction even sets up probably what our main ideas will be in the essay coming up, which makes it a little bit better. Okay, so that's different types of introductions that you can use for your synthesis essay. Let's take a look at what someone did when they actually wrote a national answer for the college cost essay. This, number one, I'm going to have you read silently with the substitute. This one will give you a little understanding of how someone writes this and how they write it really well, an essay. So 1A is an example of a great response to a synthesis essay. You're going to have copies of 3 different essays, 1A, 1B, and 1C. As you know, one is high, one is medium, one is low. Read those over, and then the substitute is going to reveal to you which scores they were actually given, high, medium, or low. All right, I hope that helps you for today with your class plans or with the plans for the class. The other thing that I want to announce to you is tomorrow you're going to need your 50 essays books in class. So make sure that you bring those to class tomorrow so that you're ready to go for tomorrow's lesson. Thanks.